at Key Bank,
Yeah.
Constantine,
Yeah.
and now at the Cleveland Housing Network, but now known as the CHN Housing Partners. But Kevin's also a University of Michigan grad, and I will definitely forgive him for that. Anyway, he's been a pleasure to work with, and I understand it's been great to see what a quote-unquote general counsel and director of strategic initiatives ought to be like, and it's a place that is growing, not a small part, not without some due to your work, and it's an exciting place to be, and I wanted him to come in and talk to you about affordable housing, and he's going to touch a little bit on some national issues and what we do at the organization. Feel free to interrupt him for questions, but it's probably best to wait till the end of his very extensive PowerPoint.
Stayed up too late. So thank you everyone for being here. Excited to be here. I am a Detroiter. Where are you from in Detroit area?
Rochester, so
Okay.
north of the metro area.
Oh yeah, I know Rochester. My wife grew up in West Bloomfield. I'm a city Detroit guy. Capital
Nice.
Central. So I'll talk a little bit about CHN. Talk a little bit about how I got there. One of the things that Laura mentioned is I am a Detroiter and went to Michigan. I really got involved in affordable housing back in high school. Went to all boys Catholic school in Detroit and started working with Habitat for Humanity and swung a hammer throughout college with Habitat. Did a couple of mission trips oriented to that work. In my family, I grew up in a blue collar family. My dad was a Detroit police officer. My mom was a secretary of Catholic grade school, and we were impacted by kind of workforce housing need. So I'm not going to say that we were in the LMI, low to moderate income, classification, but we were definitely in the workforce housing designation. For those of you who know kind of housing designations, that's really people who are just less than or a little bit more than the area median income, which here in the Cleveland area is about $66,000. That brought me to working in the affordable housing industry, and I was fortunate enough while I was at Thompson Hine to get connected onto the board of CHN Housing Partners. Almost said Cleveland Housing Partners. Don't tell Kate if I say that. At CHN Housing Partners, and then I went over to Key Bank. I ran Key Bank's tax credit equity group. So what's tax credit equity? Not sure how many of you know what that means. Tax credit equity is really the primary driver for affordable housing development in our country. We'll talk about the low-income housing tax credit a little bit later today. We also did historic tax credits, which is really one of the primary ways that we redevelop historic buildings. I won't get into that today. That's a whole other day. As well as new markets tax credits, which really are job creation tax credit, which has been primarily used as a real estate development tool. So I did that while I was on the board of CHN, and then was lucky enough to come over as the general counsel and director of strategic initiatives back in April of 2016. So who is CHN Housing Partners? As I mentioned, we're formerly Cleveland Housing Network. We were formed in 1981. We were really formed as a consortium of CDCs to address affordable housing issues, particularly homeownership issues in the city of Cleveland. To this day, the CDCs that remain in the city of Cleveland are a core component to our board of directors, but over time we've added at-large board of directors who don't necessarily need to be city of Cleveland residents, can be from anywhere in Northeast Ohio. Our mission is to leverage the power of affordable, stable housing to change lives and improve communities. And really, we focus on the power of a permanent address. And we'll talk a little bit more later about this, but housing costs are the single greatest cost that most anyone has in their life. We feel as an organization that housing stability, someone having a home to live in that they can afford, can be used as a platform, for themselves, improve their lives, to improve their children's lives, and also it has a stabilizing force on communities. We're CHN Housing Partners. We like to partner with sister nonprofits, government entities, financial institutions to really kind of administer and develop programs that help us to bring housing stability. And we have a primary focus of Northeast Ohio. Until about 10 years ago, it was really City of Cleveland exclusive. But over time, we have stretched throughout Northeast Ohio, and also we've begun a stretch statewide, as well into adjacent states. So today, for example, I was over in Toledo, chatting with some folks over there about potential opportunities for us. Some stats about CHN. We're a vertically integrated real estate developer, general contractor, property manager, broker, and lender for housing. So we got the whole platform. And one of the things about CHN that over the years, if you had our marketing brochure, it shows that we've cobbled together all these resources in a way that tries to kind of comprehensively address the needs of our society. We've developed over 6,000 units of affordable housing. As part of our vertically integrated, structure, we have a contracting and a property management arm. We can do third-party property management. We can do our own property management. But also one of the things we're proudest of up here is that we're a partner in the Housing First Consortium. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. Here in Cleveland, the Housing First Consortium, started in about 2004 with a goal to end chronic homelessness. Chronic homelessness is a HUD designation, and it's people that have dual diagnosis and kind of disability, drug addiction, mental health issues. So it's really the people that are most impacted, from a housing perspective, and the hardest to treat. So we set off with the goal of ending chronic homelessness. That doesn't mean everything, right? There'll still be the Normal Hair Shelter. There'll still be family homelessness that we need to address. But in terms of those that are hardest, the hardest to treat, we've reduced that by 86% since the start of initiative. And we were just awarded the funding that once we begin operations in the building about 2 years from now, we'll have statistically eliminated chronic homelessness. And so that's called Functional Zero in Cuyahoga County, which will be about 800 units. And that means that over time, as we have enough units to fulfill the demand for those who are chronic homelessness. So it's cool to be part of something where oftentimes you see societal issues and you don't see you don't see an end to it, right? And we'll be at a point in chronic homelessness in Cuyahoga County where we've addressed the issue from a home perspective. We completed about 8,000 weatherization jobs a year. So weatherization, that's energy efficiency, whether it be replacing refrigerators, doing insulation, replacing HVAC units, and we bring together a number of programs through the government, through private entities, through the utilities, and that brings down that increases energy efficiency about 32%. We provide housing and financial counseling. Those are two different things. Housing counseling focuses on someone's home, right, and their ability to maintain a home. Financing is kind of economic development stuff. So, trying to help someone with kind of their savings and job security and that sort of thing. Aggregator of social safety net resources. One of the things, if you look closely at your utility bills, one example is there's a little note on there as to one of the fees that's charged. That actually goes to this social safety net resource that we administer. So if someone doesn't have heat during the winter, if someone is boiling in their house during the summer, their electricity is shut off, their gas is shut off, they can call us and we can help them to turn it back on. We don't just help them turn it back on, but then also we try to find a path for someone to have kind of more self-sufficiency. So we have the initial, right? Let's get them back, the lights turned on, and let's get them to self-sufficiency beyond that. So this all, when you look at our entire platform, is 30,000 unduplicated households. For those of you in the nonprofit world, right, this is nonprofit administration, they're duplicated, unduplicated, right? So when you're doing your numbers, if you go to duplicated, we're like 60,000. But you go to kind of unduplicated and it's like 30,000. Any questions on who we are? Why is affordable housing a component? I mentioned earlier, housing is the single largest expense for most Americans. The greater percentage income that a family spends on housing reduces the amount of cash that's available for other needs. So you're talking about healthy fresh foods. Getting healthy fresh foods is much more expensive than getting canned goods, right? But we also know those are better for us. They have less sodium content, they have less preservatives, etc. Healthcare, right? Healthcare is expensive. We all know that. So if someone has less disposable income because it's spending so much on their housing needs, they have less to spend on taking care of themselves, which is a personal issue and a societal issue, right? Beyond, basic needs, transportation for work, if you can't afford a car, how do you get to work? Okay, well, take the bus. Well, is there access? Do we have the best transit system in the country? By far, no. Do we have an adequate transportation system? People will debate that. There will be some no's, there'll be some, well, maybe depending on where your position is on it. I'm not taking either, especially with that video on. Education, right? How can someone help to improve their lives? How can someone get educated if they're spending all their money on their housing need? That's for the person, that's for the children, right? Retirement savings, et cetera. So really, when we look at affordable housing as a platform, right? There's an investment by the government, there's investment by the private sector, right, in affordable housing. What's our net benefit, right? What's our, people would ask what's the rate of return of that. Well, I'll give you an example. So when we, in our permanent supportive housing work, so that's the work when I talked about housing first and, serving the chronic homeless, this was just striking to me because when I was at Key, I was like, what, why are we doing this, right? As we were investing in all these deals. And so there was a guy who was living at one of the projects, it's called Greenbridge Commons. It's at about 78th and Euclid, so right on the health line. And he had gone to Metro and checked himself into the emergency room over 365 times in a year. Okay? Imagine the Medicaid cost for someone going in to an emergency room that many times. Okay? Within our first year, we brought that down to like 80 something. Okay, so they're like, okay, well, what the heck? We still haven't fully solved it, but think about the cost savings. I mean, it's thousands of dollars every time someone comes into the emergency room, right? He's checking himself in because, had addiction issues that he's dealing with. It was cold outside, right? It was too hot outside, but was sick and made himself to the emergency room to address his kind of housing need. And I mean, that's a reality in our society, and how people will address some of their issues. Safe, affordable housing creates stability for a household and is proven to improve outcomes for children. So another kind of interesting thing for you. So our executive director was in meetings with Cleveland schools, okay? And one of the Cleveland schools, we had a teacher, I think it was in middle school, and she said that over 50% of the kids that started with her in September were not there in May. Okay, over 50%. And that isn't all because of truancy or those sort of things, right? It's families move, right? There is a lack of stability in housing in Cleveland. I had a metric when I worked at Key, I worked nationally. In Tacoma, Washington, there was a school district at a school that was in the area that was most impacted by homelessness, and over 70% of their kids were transitioning in and out of school throughout the year. I mean, that's just, we're not just talking about adults like us, we're talking about kids that are impacted by this. Rural stable housing provides a platform that promotes positive outcomes in education, employment, health, career. Said that. So on that kind of intro, does anyone have any questions kind of around, you can tell I'm a big fan of affordable housing, throwing out last few things that are positives, but happy to kind of entertain any kind of questions on that so far.
What's the connection? Talk about there's a housing component, and then you're doing some other services too, with the healthy eating, the transfer. So how far does that extend, or how long does that go?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll say, so there's a number of different kinds of housing that we do, okay? So, we do, and I'll talk in detail around our lease purchase work, which is an opportunity for a low-income family to lease a home and then buy it at the end of a period of time, okay? Then, and then there's the permanent supportive housing work, which is the chronically homeless. There's other work like with seniors, okay? So for our permanent supportive housing work, it's intensive social services throughout. When it's called permanent supportive housing, even kind of when you're working in the homeless space or transitional housing and that sort of stuff, this is permanent. Someone comes in, they can live there forever, right? We have house rules and that sort of stuff as you'd expect. But as part of that program, we have a front desk staff that provides social services. We have frontline services who provides a lot of kind of the social services and counseling and drug addiction services, mental health We work with Carolines, they come in regularly with mobile, mobile medical services. So that's kind of an ongoing thing, right? And that's throughout the life of the project. You have like a senior facility, like we have a project we call Huff Heritage, that's right by the Innova site. It's like Chester and East 97th. It's kind of tucked away on East 97th. And so there's the dental school, or there's the dental facility that's being put, that will serve, it'll be free to low moderate income people who live in the Huff neighborhood. We have the building kind of right behind where that will be located. It's like 60 units senior, and so we have kind of senior-oriented services we would provide there, right? And that is kind of some of that, like we will build into the budget of our projects, so from the cash flows of the project, some of it we do outside fundraising for. It's kind of a comprehensive program. You look at, going back to our lease purchase, and we'll talk about that later, right? We have a program that we fundraise for, right? So we're with philanthropy to help people learn how to become homeowners, right? And to improve credit scores and, get rid of derogatory debt and, that sort of thing. So we'll bring the full scope, but, really what we're looking to do at the end of the day is for people to become, self-sufficient, particularly in our lease purchase world, because we're trying to move people from being low moderate income tenants, right, to becoming homeowners. There will be times where your permanent supportive housing will have success stories where someone, has been able to move on and live on their own and not have a recurring homelessness and drug addiction being an issue. Over 90% of the people that go into those facilities, we currently have 8 of them operational, are not returning to homelessness. So pretty good success story, but it's kind of an ongoing thing.
Do you do any work with like the land bank or the blighted houses?
Sure.
Do you refurbish those? Does that get into the network?
Yeah. So we work with the land bank, and particularly with kind of like site acquisition. Like one of the great things about our land bank is that it allows it can hold land and help to kind of assemble properties. They're a great partner for us in that world. We're starting to have conversations with them about going into the rehab space with them. They're there right now. We have our own general contractor, like I mentioned. Now it's kind of time for us to have those conversations around trading more in acquisition rehab space, which is part of what Cleveland needs.
One of the challenges the returning citizens face when they come to the society is housing. Do you help them with your organization?
Sure. Yeah. So we don't have a specific kind of program around that per se. But one that we're trying to address, we call it International Village. It's kind of the Stockyards neighborhood. And so we'll be working closely with Catholic Charities and others who identify immigrant refugee populations who have come and have tended to settle in that neighborhood. It's like it's close to where the Thomas Jefferson Newcomer program is. It hasn't been a specific focus of ours. Catholic Charities has done a lot of work in that space. But our housing is available to anyone who comes in, who is in our country.
I'm just curious, in your work with housing, and I don't know if you've encountered this much directly, have you had any struggles with people who might be homeless, like living on the streets, who really kind of push back against moving into some kind of housing? I say that because, when I did some working with the homeless out in Los Angeles, some people were really, I don't know if I'm ready to have my own place, or if that's something that you would find often.
That is a struggle.
Yeah.
That can be a struggle. I think we have great partners who are on the social service side that specialize in that work.
Sure.
One of the things with the Housing First model is it's a harm reduction model, and that means that you're meeting people where they are, right? So there's a big debate, particularly around the opioid crisis, as to whether it's a sober housing environment or a harm reduction environment. In our permanent supportive housing work, it's been a harm reduction model based upon the population that we're serving chronic homelessness. That's not always the right model, and it's not the right model for everyone, but that's what we have done. And I think that has encouraged people to come in because they're accepted as they are, as opposed to saying, hey, you know what, you have issues, you need to fix those issues if you're going to live here. So that's kind of indirectly how we've addressed that.
Yeah.
In our last class last week, we watched someone speak about new Jim Crow laws. So I'm just curious, like, do you provide services for people who have been convicted of felonies? Is there any sort of, like, I know public housing, there's a lot of discrimination there, but like, how do you as an organization handle that?
Yeah, so, background checks are all part of what we do, right? There are certain funding streams, particularly federal funding streams, that have restrictions on having people who have had felonies within, so we need to work within that space, because all of our housing projects have some component of federal funding, so depending on the sources, it limits our ability to house people who have felony convictions. But one of the things that we've been looking at, because we have been so successful in the supportive housing space, the permanent supportive housing, is what model can we adapt, in looking at trying to address some of those issues with reentry population. We've begun to kind of tiptoe toward there, but we haven't gotten to a model yet. But that would need to be, if that were, federal funding gets really messy.
Right.
So that would need to be something that has limited federal funding. And, it's hard when you get into kind of the sexual crimes versus the, other crimes. It's a whole other issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering, I know you mentioned that you did some projects in the Huff neighborhood, and I know that that is traditionally an area without a lot of economic opportunity and access to jobs. Do you build in other areas with, for example, better school systems, trying to create a more integrated community economically?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've done work throughout Northeast Ohio now, and so if you look at the kind of spread of our projects throughout the city of Cleveland, we're talking about projects that are on the east side and the west side, in tough neighborhoods, in neighborhoods that are selling homes at $300,000. So if you look at we call it Emerald Alliance 8, Emerald Alliance is the permanent supportive housing projects. That's at like east or west 86, 83, 8301 Detroit Road, in Detroit Shoreway neighborhood. Our lease purchase projects have been throughout the entire city. And our lease purchase projects, which I'll talk about a little more later, we're selling those homes at, $30,000 in Ohio City. So, it is a mix, and we have been intentional, around, setting our properties, throughout the city, and as we expanded into the inner suburbs and beyond. We've been thoughtful around that. It's an important component. And it is a debate that's going on right now, and it's something, that our funding sources for our local housing tax credit work are allocated through the state of Ohio's Ohio Housing Finance Agency, and areas of opportunity have been a particular focus for them. And I think the development community to that end struggles some, and not just us as an organization, but others around trying to find the right models that fit the true nature of what we're trying to get to, right? I live in Avon Lake, so I'll pick on Avon Lake instead of picking on any other suburb, right? But if we look at Avon Lake, that is an area of opportunity, right? The land acquisition cost, the amount of resistance locally there. There was resistance locally there to $160,000 townhomes. Okay, so I believe in it. We as an organization believe in it. But I think that organizations like ours who want to truly meet that, the true spirit of areas of opportunity, need to find the right models for it to work. And it'll be, I think, an iterative process for a lot of us.
And kind of on the back end of that question, interestingly, the Huff Heritage building that you mentioned is the affordable component of a larger master plan in that community. The Upper Chester plan it includes very upscale apartments across from the Cleveland Clinic. So
Yeah. No, I've driven by. I mean, I know there's potential there, but it's still a struggling area.
of course, but yeah. Great.
I'm just wondering, is the organization, the way I look at it, maybe you will explain this more, is it like helping the individual or families? Are there some, let's say, programs like the community, the beneficiaries come, people get homeless or they're having problems with accommodation, because of other problems. Perhaps it is also a good niche for them to come together and discuss some of these things and some other programs that can work on. Does the organization do that?
Sure. So I think a couple of things to that. Our board so we have a resident advisory council, okay? And our resident advisory council is made up of our residents in all of our different platforms, right? And then there are 2 members of our board are appointed by the resident advisory council. We actively participate in that, and then our programming committee also has people from our residents who participate in our program committee. So in terms of a voice for of our community of approximately 1,500 managed units at this point, they have an active voice within our organization, not just as a tenant but also as part of the board management. So we respond to those needs, and we actually work with our resident advisory council as part of our kind of annual budgeting process, and even talking through our rent increases, right? And then, to the extent that we identify a need or our residents identify a need, there's sometimes where we can develop a program to address that need. Sometimes it's more efficient to work with a partner who already has a program that addresses that need. So we've built really a coalition of different partners, throughout Northeast Ohio, that to the extent that it doesn't make sense for us to develop the program like organically on our own, that we can work with another organization to deliver the services that are needed.
How as an organization are you all preparing for the proposed reduced cuts and a lot of the critical safety net benefits that I'm sure a lot of your clients take advantage of or use?
Sure. Well, one of the things that specifically impacted us right off the bat was tax reform. Okay, and when the election happened, last November, the investment community assumed that there was going to be a major tax reform that would happen in like the first or second quarter of 2017. I was like, yeah, right. Okay, but I was on the investment side, right? And I have friends that are there, and I'm like, come on, guys, I used to be there. Now I have to push back on you. So the low-income housing tax credit is the primary tool for affordable housing. Okay, it is invested by primarily banks. Okay, and banks have a 35% tax rate generally. Okay. If the effective tax rate for a corporation, for a bank, goes from 35% to 25%, that is equivalent of us losing like 10% of our funding for a project. So it's that so that would happen immediately, and it went even further. So all the banks assumed that we were going from a 35% tax rate to a 20% tax rate. I think we're going to be around 27 if it happens. But they said, okay, 20%, that's what we're underwriting to. So all of a sudden we had these projects that were fully funded, right? That had a hold of at least 15%, as Scott was saying. So that was something that happened right away. You can't plan for that sort of thing. You can plan for the other things we'll get to in a second. So as an organization, you only have so much you can kind of have as capital to say, okay, well, something big like that happens, you have to. The Ohio Housing Finance Agency offered additional funding to help fill those gaps. And then, for the next set of projects, we had to retool our capital stack. That could have positive effects, it could have negative effects, and negative effects because there's limited soft sources, which means sources that you don't have to pay on an ongoing basis. To like a government entity, it's due and payable maybe in 30 years down the road. But there's only a limited supply of that. So it meant, well, a lot of these projects then either go and seek out must-pay bank debt, which then means that you need to charge higher rents, right? Or if you can't charge higher rents because these are restricted projects, you can only charge so much, then you need to cut services that you provide. So it's like that sort of negative effect. So then, so people are working through that right now, and we've addressed that pretty well in our projects that we're planning on applying for tax credits in February. In terms of the operating support, we have a really diverse set of like kind of financial mechanisms, right? Our funders are everything from you know, public entities to private entities to kind of quasi-public utilities. So like our utility bill payment stuff, there's some that's government, there's some that's, you know, that's you know, kind of the energy companies. So, you know, you end up losing on the government side, but not necessarily on the private side. And then what we need to do is work with private organizations to try to fill those holes to the extent we can. So we've begun to adjust for that, assume that some of that is going away. You know, one of the things that we as an organization have been looking at, that I don't think I covered in this PowerPoint, I didn't do it in the intro to CHN, is we're looking at creating a community development financial institution. A community development financial institution is an entity that is dedicated to primarily funding in low to moderate income areas to low to moderate income individuals. And so we're still looking at that. We're working with banks to try to find, you know, the capital to capitalize that and begin the work there. An entity like that has a harder time becoming self-sufficient without federal funding. One of the things that was cut in the Trump budget and would likely be cut in any kind of, you know, budget deal is the funding for the CDFI fund program, which funds that. Just capital magnet fund, financial assistance, technical assistance type of stuff that is competitive. That a startup CDFI like ours that is looking to address residential mortgage issues, which very few are willing or able to try to address, would have more likely than not attracted from the federal government because other people haven't been able to figure it out. So, yeah, it's something that we need to address, and we're trying to, but there's so much it's, you know, kind of at stake that if things get cut, it's going to be a kind of a process to try to get them where they need to be. But as an organization, we're so well diversified from a revenue perspective, it is going to take us. So one of the things that you look at many nonprofits is, you know, that are community based, you know, is they are heavily dependent on like CDBG funding, right? CDBG is, you know, in some of these budgets that have come out. So, you know, that's not even an operating source for us. So it doesn't impact us as much as, like, let's say, some of the CDCs here in Cleveland.
In the other class, we talked about diversified business models to keep nonprofits strong. This is what I'm talking about. Our streams of funding are diverse enough that not any one thing is going to kill us.
All right, so, you know, one of the things that, you know, I just wanted to hammer home is, you know, the affordable housing world, it's about serving the people. You know, we don't just consider people our residents, we consider them our clients, right? And it's really fundamental to our mission that we affect the folks' lives. So as, you know, kind of part of what we did recently was to do kind of a documentary type of video, you know, about one of the families that we serve. I just want to share it with you because I just thought it was really cool. Kind of, I don't need to say much more after you read about impact after you listen to it. So, oh, actually, nice. Is our website? It's pretty sweet. Check it out sometime.
Yes, it is.
And is the sound coming down? Oh, hey, oh, we changed our name. Glad that works.
My name is Mr. Keith Love. I live at this 39th Street. I live with my wife, Mrs. Francine Bowling Love, and my granddaughter, Kanaya May.
Before I lived here, the neighborhood I lived in was a rough neighborhood. It used to be a very peaceful neighborhood. I grew up there. Matter of fact, there was the family home. But it started to get really bad. Shooting, shootouts. It wasn't very safe anymore.
I used to always just say, I've got to get my wife and them somewhere. And I always had to go to my wife and something that was hers. One day, I got a phone call. My wife was told me that it was shooting over here right next to the house. I said enough is enough.
It was really scared. And that was it. But at that time, I had no idea where we were going. She was telling about the properties, how they give people homes, and she said they're for low-income people. She's people that don't think they can even own a home. The majority of their homes already have security systems set up in their home for safety.
I know what we had to do. I told my wife, I'm going to put you in a new home. I got a phone call within a week. When we first got this house, my granddaughter was so excited that she didn't care how heavy something was. She wanted to pick it up and help. I saw the tears in her eyes, the joy. I was able to breathe. My experience with CHN is beautiful.
I just never thought that I would be a homeowner, but it's ours.
This house is very important to me and my family. It's permanent. My granddaughter, this is her home.
You could go outside and sit on your porch. She's not scared like she used to be. She says she wants to own this house when she grows up.
When I get to the end of the street of East 38th Street, I sit there for like 3 or 4 minutes sometimes, and I just look. Sometimes I even wipe my eyes because I say, I'm coming home.
Cool, pretty sweet video. I mean, it's why I do this every day. So, who supports affordable housing? It's interesting. Liberal and conservative congressmen and senators have really supported the low-income housing tax credit since its creation in 1986, and even as part of the kind of latest tax reform outline. The low-income housing tax credit is one of the 2 tax credits that are still kind of left as highlighted as being left within the tax code. Which was great. Tax rate might be a little low for a low-income housing tax credit project, but we'll take it. Tax credit is in there. There's actually Senators Cantwell and Hatch. Not only did they kind of defensively introduce a bill out of fear of tax reform wiping out the low-income housing tax credit, they co-sponsor a bill that doesn't just preserve it, but also expands it further. Because there is a significant need, not just to preserve housing, but develop new housing. We have a couple more stats about that later. We're gonna talk about that. All right, the need for affordable housing. So cost burden. So when does your house become a burden for you from a cost perspective? Anyone paying over 30% of their income, and housing costs is considered cost burden. That impacts you usually further, right? To the extent of your income. right? If you're making $40,000 and you're paying over 30%, that probably means more than if you're making $500,000 and paying 30%. It's 40+% of renters are cost burdened or severely cost burdened. Minimally cost burden is 30, and severely cost burden is like 40 plus. There is a shortage of 7.4 million homes for extremely low income, which is people less than 30% of the area median income. Again, I said Cleveland, it's like 66,000. And so, said another way, for Cleveland metropolitan area, there's only 44 homes for every 100 homes needed for people who are extremely low income to live without a cost burden. So, we're filling a need for 44 out of 100 people that need that place to live. Over the course of recession, cost burdens increase in every income category below 100% of area median income. And part of it was function that, rental costs are increasing, incomes are decreasing, and even as incomes have stagnated, and have been just kind of creeping up, housing costs have continued to rise. So you look at, there are great things happening in Cleveland from a real estate perspective, right? I mean, you're seeing people living downtown, you're seeing it's good for us as a kind of metropolitan area to have, kind of increasing property values, increasing rents, but not everywhere, right? And when you have increasing rents, places like downtown, you want to try to maintain some level of affordability within that area too, right? So it's something that we need to work toward. So at average cost burdens lead, and I mentioned some of these kind of expenditures earlier, 38% decrease in food purchases, 55% decrease in healthcare expenditures, and 42% decrease in retirement savings. Pretty significant. I mean, it's not just the individual. I mean, look at the societal impact, right? I always look at IRR and kind of investments that we do at CHN as investments that, our governments do, local, state, federal. There's very few better rates of return than the local, federal, state governments' investments in affordable housing. Components to housing affordability. I listed a bunch of them here, and I was trying to figure out how to address this slide earlier, and so I'll just kind of go down the list here. So housing costs. I'm going to define that as going to be rent or mortgage payment. Okay, we aren't going to get into the other pieces because I think we should break them out separately. Utility costs: electric, gas, water, sewer, tax, insurances. So our taxes, right? I mean, we're talking kind of areas of opportunity, right? For someone to be a homeowner in Bay Village, Avon Lake, Rag River, I'm out there, right? Someone has more cost, it has increased costs and taxes in some of those cities than other areas, based on home value, based on millage rates. So it's something that can impact anyone anywhere, and it's something that one of the components that we take into account when we are looking at transitioning someone from a renter to a homeowner, because that's a fixed cost that they will have associated with their home. Home maintenance costs, your routine day-to-day, right? Your day-to-day, and then also you need your roof. Someone who is cost burdened, right? I mean, they can barely pay their rent and everything else. If you need a new roof, you're in serious trouble. HVAC, your hot water tank blows, right? That can happen to anyone any day. Financial wherewithal, now that gets into kind of the, their own ability to, kind of generate income, right? Able to save, able to kind of save and have those reserves for addressing, home ownership, that comes with it. One of the things that, has been an interesting impact, is that there's been an increase. So there's the rental component, which is often what you hear about when people talk about affordable housing, right? Rental. CHN was like born on home ownership. I mean, that's why we originally formed. It's something that we believe strongly in. So I'm going to just kind of transition here for a second. I didn't make it clear, but I want to transition for a second. So one of the things, with Dodd-Frank, which is trying to address this, kind of all the issues in the banking system. was that it has really limited access to capital for low to moderate income people, right? The Dodd-Frank bill, through its regulation, has created this like white box that banks need to underwrite, okay? And, you have the federal government dictating to banks and dictating to other lenders, here's the credit criteria that we feel is the right criteria to lend. And that's just like, the banks, the kind of local folks like us know a little better, how to address kind of credit underwriting. We have a successful model, like in the underwriting that we've done, which doesn't use any of the banking metrics because we're exempt from them, right? And we have lower default rates than KeyBank and Huntington on our mortgages. So, it's something that has been kind of a unique thing where it creates this regulatory environment that does not allow banks to make those loans, make loans like they used to, and it also has made it more costly for them to make those loans. So when you look at something like a loan that's $50,000 or less for a home, right? It is not cost effective for a bank to make those loans. A bank is losing money on those loans. They're making, because of the overhead, for just paying the regular old lender, but then also all of the kind of regulatory, kind of overhead that banks now have in place, it has become too costly for banks to make loans typically at $50,000 or less. So, it has caused this shift in HMDA lending, Home Mortgage Disclosure Act lending, which focuses on low and moderate income individuals and low and moderate income communities. And in the Cleveland area has actually led to a decrease of 50+%, home purchase lending and 70+% decrease in home repair lending to low and moderate income people and to low and moderate income areas, which is kind of interesting facts. Affordable housing programs, I put a list here. I'm not going to go through all of them, and there are a ton more. One of the things that Ohio, Ohio it actually has a substantial amount of resource and a very forward-thinking financing agency for homes. So it's Ohio Housing Finance Agency. I've worked across the country. It's one of the best in the country. The amount of resources and programs that they have, this has been something that Ohio's known for a long period of time. They have actively, kind of been really proactively addressed issues throughout the financial crisis, throughout the recent kind of tax reform issues and worries. They're a great organization to work with. So we're kind of fortunate here in Ohio, with our state, kind of our state level home ownership perspective, or home affordability perspective. There's a bunch of federal programming, Home Investment Partnership, HUD, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac lending programs that focus on affordable housing. There's rural programs. The rural programs, an interesting note, I know we're in Cleveland and we're probably not thinking about kind of rural housing needs right off the top of our heads. I did a ton of work when I was at Key in rural areas. I think you can get out west, when I went to, it's like 5 or 6 rural housing deals in Idaho. Rural Idaho, in the middle of nowhere, like beyond potato country. And the only way that these deals get done is with this kind of like heavy subsidy with the rural development. Okay, so this isn't HUD, this is some kind of separate agency within the Department of Agriculture. And they have a really unique program that actually would be interesting to see if like a group like ours would try to replicate the rural development program within like an urban setting, a Cleveland area. Where effectively they use these 2 programs called 521 and 515. 521 being a rental subsidy, 515 being a interest rate subsidy and a loan, right? And they create this like cyclical nature where they have this pot of money that they're able to use to provide the rental subsidy that pays the expenses, but then also pays the debt service and then cycles back to the program, to the project. So it's kind of like interesting the way that they set this up, because it's kind of like this kind of like closed loop, that they've created. Noted state and local tax credit lending programs. One of the things that Ohio doesn't have is a affordable housing tax credit at the state level. Some states have them, some states don't. Oftentimes states are looking to address kind of more the workforce population or trying to fill gaps, in financing streams and certain kinds of affordable housing projects with the state tax credit. But Ohio has substantial lending programs, both in the rental and the ownership space. And, people know, like, Cuyahoga Metropolitan Housing Authority and other public housing projects. Anyone have any questions before I dig into some details around the whole housing tax credit program? So I'm going to start going along. Okay. LIHTC, so it's a tax credit program overview, and kind of LIHTC and tax credits almost kind of like shrimp scampi. But housing subsidy program enacted as part of the Tax Reform Act of 1986. It really leverages private capital. So, one of the things I really like about government programs is when government programs don't just, kind of provide operating support and kind of like government dollars, paying dollar for dollar for expenses, but when they leverage, private sources. So the Housing Tax Credit Program provides tax credits to a project, and then private investor, like I mentioned earlier, almost always banks, invest in these tax credits. And they, in some types of tax credit programs, will drain 70 to 80% of the total capital stack. And others maybe like around 30% of the total capital stack, depending on the kind of tax credit you're using. So Section 42 of the Internal Revenue Code, and the credits provide a dollar for dollar reduction of the investor's federal tax liability. And one of the unique features about the low housing tax credit, and I don't know if there's any tax nerds in here, I'm one of them. There is the alternative minimum tax. A lot of tax credits do not offset the alternative minimum tax. The LIHTC credit does. It's like gold. It's a tax credit that will address all kinds of taxes that a corporation has. The program administered by each of the state's housing finance agencies. So, the Treasury Department, HUD, they aren't trying to do it from Washington. They're saying, hey, you know what? Each state has a certain amount of tax credits that it can allocate, and state, you figure out the best way to do it for your state, which is pretty neat. But also, as a developer who goes into multiple states, it can be quite interesting to see different policy priorities, on a state-by-state basis. We, as a developer, CJ as part of the developer, we identify investors who would seek to invest in affordable housing developments in exchange for the economic advantage tax credits, and also to address the Community Reinvestment Act need. So, take a second to talk about Community Investment Act. Community Investment Act is an act that obligates banks and other financial institutions, I have to say that, to invest in their communities. So there's three parts to the Community Investment Act test that banks have to go through. There's a lending test, there's an investment test, and there's a service test. Each of those, exactly what they sound like, are what you'd expect, right? Like, investment tests. So I mentioned that I worked in the group that made those investments, right? So, investing in affordable housing projects, investing in catalytic type of investments in the city, investing in small business investment companies, SBICs. All of those qualify. The other part of the investment test is philanthropy. So, banks oftentimes will have foundations. So their foundation giving, which is most often, capitalized by the profits of the bank, counts towards the investment test. The lending test, there is the lending to affordable housing projects, like we do, and other kinds of redevelopment and revitalization. There's also the lending to the consumer, so residential mortgage lending, which if you look, we mentioned earlier, another reason why banks would be interested in working with us to create a community development financial institution is what I talked about earlier. 50+% decrease in the ability to generate loans, that they are obligated to make under the Community Reinvestment Act. So puts them in a tight pinch. The other is a service test. So where are your bank branches located, right? Are they located in low moderate income neighborhoods? Are they just located in kind of rich suburbs, right? If they're located in low moderate income neighborhoods, do they provide services that are tailored to low moderate income people, right? Are you just making, loans to small business people, or are you also trying to provide financial education, providing kind of, no or low fee banking accounts, all that sort of stuff, is all into the service test. So it's a pretty powerful tool, and some banks do it, satisfy it because they need to from a business perspective, because it's a regulatory requirement. Others, I worked at Key, and I'm a big booster of Key because when I was there, I was in the group that addressed this. I can tell you, I had personal conversations with Beth Mooney, who said her legacy is, Keys impacting communities. So there's, various of kind of like where our local banks come from, but I can tell you, my personal experience is that Keys is a substantial investment here. Test credit program overview. I mentioned earlier there are two types of tax credits, 9%, 4%. I'm not getting all the detail, but I said in one case, it generates 70 to 80% of the tax credits. That's or 70 to 80% of the capital stack is equity. That's the 9%. That of course is a more competitive process because you're able to generate more equity and subsidize your project costs more that way. The 4% credit, it's used with state tax exempt bond financing and only covers about 30%. It is not as competitive. If you go to California, Colorado, it becomes competitive. Utah is one of the hottest CRA markets in the country. You're like, why the heck Utah? Well, here's another interesting fact. Salt Lake City, Utah is the place where most of the credit card companies, when they created bank holding companies during the recession to get the funds from the bailouts, they are in Salt Lake City, Utah, or its burbs. So it has become, the tax and the business law structure incentivizes them to go. So, there are a huge amount of deposits, and your CRA obligations are based upon your deposits, right? And their deposits are located there. So in addition to Key, Wells Fargo, US Bank being located there, there's billions of dollars of, these funds, these deposits that are in Salt Lake City. And so it's like a hyper-competitive market. So like New York City, most hyper-competitive, San Francisco, hyper-competitive. Tied with San Francisco is Salt Lake City, Utah. Right? So once the state allocates credits, the developer must complete the project, certify its cost, and then lease units to lower minor income tenants within a set time frame. So there are, depending on the priority and depending upon kind of the policy goals of the state financing agency, they will provide, they will require certain income restrictions, right? So they'll say you need to serve, or we want you to serve people who are 60% of their income or less in a certain percentage of your project. We want you to serve people with 30% of their income or less in a certain percentage of your project. So depending on the project type, depending upon who you're trying to serve, that may work well, it may not. But that's something that all low-income housing tax credit projects, in order to be eligible for tax credits, you need to restrict your rents to 60% of the area median income or less. To the extent that you don't have units that aren't at that restriction, you can't generate tax credits on the development of those individual units. It's an interesting concept. Tax credit program overview, projects financed. So this can do everything, right? It can do any kind of project. That addresses kind of affordable housing. I'll say that it is a little more difficult in Ohio to do mixed income in these sort of projects than it is in other states. And it's because of our rents, right? It's not impossible, but it's more difficult. So if you're in Denver, Colorado, right, there is a big spread between their market rents and their affordable rents. So if their rents are restricted at like $800 per month on a unit, right, at the 60% AMI level, their market rents are like $1,500, $1,700, $2,000, right? In Ohio, Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo, anywhere, there is a compression on what would be the market rate achievable rents typically, and the affordable rents that are achievable. And so if you can't generate that additional income, right, with the higher rents, you can't pay for the additional debt service that you need to take on to develop those unrestricted units. Because if you have unrestricted units, you can't use the tax credit equity to develop those. So you need debt or some other source to fund them. Anyone have any questions? LIHTC compliance considerations. There's a 30-year affordability commitment. That wasn't always the case. The early tax credit projects had a 15-year restriction typically, and didn't have the 15-year extended use period that most states now require, Ohio being one of them. There's one exception to that rule, and that's the lease purchase program that we utilize at, I'll tell you in detail. But there's an issue, we talk about housing affordability, and, 7.4 million was, units, was a number raised earlier, right? For extremely low-income people. There's an issue in our country, where we have a bunch of projects that were affordable housing developed through the LIHTC program, that are getting out of year 15, right? And these are mainly multifamily executions I'm talking about, where, they are being converted to market rate apartments because, they're developed in an area, let's say Seattle or, Portland, Oregon, or, something like that, where people are then saying, well, you know what, I can get so much more money from this, right? I mean, as a for-profit developer as opposed to a nonprofit, right? I'm gonna convert this to market rate. So then you lose those units as affordable units within, your city, right? So there are some groups like us who are working around and trying to find different models that could help to preserve, the affordability of these units. And there's some financial organizations that have begun to raise capital to try to address, some of that. It's interesting because it's a market reaction to the end of the compliance period, and it's a market reaction to trying to preserve that affordable housing. It's interesting. Income restrictions, LIHTC units are reserved for tenants with incomes capped at 36%. I already talked about that. The project must meet one of the following conditions. So at least 20% of residential units are restricted and occupied by individuals whose income is 50% or less, or 40% of the units need to be occupied by individuals whose income is 60% or less. So I said earlier, deals in Ohio, you are best, when it worked the best in LIHTC world when they're 100% LIHTC, because that's what I described, but these are the minimums that are required. So in other states where the rents will accommodate kind of a higher level of mixed income within the developments, there can be, there's less that's required. All right, now we'll get into kind of a specific program of ours that kind of talks about the leasing component and the tenant side of affordable housing, but then also the home ownership side of affordable housing. So before I go here, anyone want to ask any questions about the LIHTC program generally?
I would like to know, many of those affordable houses, how do you make sure that they go into the hands of the right people, those of low income?
Sure. So yeah, that's a great question. So when someone applies to become a tenant, they need to provide documentation that proves their income level. And so, we'll get check stubs, we'll get, so social security stubs, tax returns, to identify and confirm that the person, has that kind of limited income, right? And that's what we use. And we actually are required annually to certify to the Ohio Housing Finance Agency that the units are occupied by people who have those that level of income.
When you say 50% or less, do you mean even zero?
Mm-hmm. It could be zero, yeah.
Okay.
So how does that work, right? So, there are a number of rental subsidy programs, okay? The one that's kind of most well-known is the Section 8 program. The Section 8 program can either be through a contract that a developer, an owner of a property has, right? So if we had a 60-unit multifamily project, right? We could have a Section 8 contract that provides for some or all of those units to have subsidized rent, okay? Or a person can be a voucher holder. That's called a tenant voucher, okay? And that person can have this voucher that would say, okay, this is gonna help me pay my rent. That person is required to pay 30% of their income, okay? The government picks up the rest. If their income is zero, their 30% is zero, so they pay zero. But the developer owner still receives the income from the property and is able to house them, right? Because of the voucher that provides that rental subsidy.
Now suppose I'm a low income person and I have a plan of finishing and paying maybe to up to 2027 is when I'm going to own the property. Now, if I die in between, what will happen to the house and what I've already paid?
So that's a good question. So the LIHTC program is a rental program through the 15-year compliance period. So one is not able to generate equity like you would like a land contract perspective, for example, through execution with the LIHTC program. So, let's say that you had children or you had a spouse, you would work with those children or spouse to help to kind of, maintain, the continuity, right? But, in terms of kind of your estate, if you didn't have, that's something where, we would run into we'd have to kind of figure out how we're gonna deal with it. So it's not, you don't build equity in the house, because it's the LIHTC program, right? You can't build equity in the house, it needs to be owned by the partnership, right? But then once you get beyond that, we enter into that, we have the purchase agreement, right? And what we will do is, because we can't build that equity throughout the course of the tenancy, we will give a residency credit for up of $1,000 for up to 10 years of residency, once you sign that purchase agreement.
So you're a renter all 15 years, and only in year 16 do you buy it outright? But you get credit for being a good renter.
Right, it's like the Loves, right? They will become a homeowner in 2027. Right? But at this point in time, right, they're technically a renter, if you want to go from a kind of technical legal perspective. But their plan and our plan is for them to be the homeowner in 2027.
So in 2027, do they buy the house for mortgage?
So that's a good question. So there will be a tail on it, right? And we finance that. So, we have a financing mechanism that would allow for them, typically, the mortgage would be somewhere around $10,000 to $12,000. And it's a 0% mortgage that gets paid off over a 4-year period.
Very affordable.
Are those tax abated properties?
They are typically during the lease period. But then once you get to a year like 13 or 14, they go off a tax abatement.
So when they buy it, it's not tax abated?
Right. So one of the things that we work through, here, I'll cover it now, but so we'll skip that slide later, is what we call the equivalency principle, okay? So when we're looking at someone going from a tenant to a homeowner, we structure our entire project and our capital stack and everything around this, right? Because it's a homeownership program for us. So what we do is we say, okay, what is the person's rent plus taxes plus insurance cost, right? Unabated, right? And we finance to that, right? And what we say is if someone has paid, let's say $600 in rent, per month, and they've done that, and they've done it consistently for 24 to 36 months, they're going to continue to do that. Right, and they're going to continue to be able to pay that amount as long as that, taxes, insurance, and mortgage, and the principal payment, so we don't have interest, we don't charge interest to our homeowners, is that same amount. And I mean, we've had like a 98% success rate.
So if you're paying your rent consistently and your mortgage isn't above your rent cost.
So basically, your program is at the end of the 15 years, because the property owner's mortgage is paid off by that time, basically, either through rents or tax subsidies or whatever. Their profit-making motive is the sale of it, for whatever they get out of it, that's their profit.
The family?
No,
So at the end of the day.
I mean, that's how you're generating your.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, there's no profit-making motive on our end, right? We essentially transfer the equity. So I had mentioned earlier that 78% of the capital stack is generated through the tax credit program, right? So through that tax credit program, we essentially transition that equity from our books to the homeowner's books, right? Because, we're providing them a sales price that is effectively building in the equity for them, right? Because they're receiving their home at $24,000 purchase price. And they're only paying they only have a mortgage of $10,000 or $12,000 for it.
But your mortgage is paid off by that.
Yeah, and so that's why we are not, yeah, so, well,
You have no cash outlay at the end of the 15-year period because you're done paying your.
well, no, not our whole mortgage, so typically we have like $6,000 to $8,000, you know, per unit, that would still be outstanding. And then there's, you know, we have our staffing costs, you know, for all the homeownership counseling and for the sales and lending functions we have. And so so the funds that we receive from the proceeds of the sale help to fund those programs. But if you look at it, you're talking about spreads of like $3,500, $5,000. You aren't talking about spreads of like $40,000 or $50,000. Now I've seen that, right? So there's programs been replicated by others in the state, and people say, oh, well, I think I can sell these for $50,000 and I can make a $30,000 profit for my organization, for profit, not profit. That's not our perspective. We want to bring the lowest price that we can with the highest amount of equity to the homeowner. Yeah, with enough to pay our costs.
So in 2029, if the Loves are ready to move out, what happens with the house?
So let's say, so they're homeowners, right? So they're homeowners in 2027, they can sell the house
And they're outright.
and yes, and yeah, it's their, so 2029, on our metric, they'll probably have, $6,000 left, at plus or minus on the mortgage they would owe us. Other sales proceeds, they pay us back. If there's any mortgage left from the city, they may have to pay a little bit to the city. But otherwise, it's their cash.
Just like any other homeowner.
It's private transaction. And I mean, it's for me, like, I look at it and, my parents financed my high school education and my college through our home equity, right? And I live in a 1,000-square-foot ranch on the west side of Detroit in an area that's kind of like West Park, right? It was all the cops and firemen, city workers and everything. And, they haven't even started. So it was a $100,000 valuation on the property, and then when the recession hit, it went down to like $35,000, and that's the mortgage they had outstanding at the time they sold the house. But they used our equity in the home. People don't have access to that if they're a renter. And, aside from education of children, equity in the home is also the kind of greatest single source for small business capital.
So what's the responsibility of the renter in that 15-year period to maintain and upkeep them?
That's a great question. So one of the unique parts of our program is that we enter into contract of care with the home, with the resident, right? Now that doesn't mean they do everything, right? As a landlord, we need to do all of the stuff you'd expect of a landlord. There's a couple of exceptions, right? So, we have them take care of the landscaping, do the grass cutting, snow plowing, that sort of stuff. If they want to make the home their own, do painting, change rugs, that sort of thing, we'll actually help to fund that. So we go kind of like 2/3, 1/3 type of thing. If it's hey, the rug's worn out in year 5, because of regular wear and tear, we replace that. That's our responsibility, right? Well, let's say they want a different rug color, they want a different paint color. We'll work with them, we'll subsidize their ability to do that, right? Major appliances, HVAC, issues with the house, that's on us, right? But, your kind of routine, I gotta get out there and cut the grass. I cut my grass every weekend. It's like my respite, that's my podcast. That's something that we expect our homeowner or our residents to do. And that helps to train them and get them into the routine of doing the maintenance. If you look at our program versus others, and those that haven't succeeded, they didn't make people feel like homeowners, right? A lot of people didn't even know they could be homeowners at the end of, kind of the compliance period, 10-year period. But from day one, I mean, when our maintenance guys go in, every 6 months, yearly, to inspect the units and to do kind of tune-ups and everything, they're showing our homeowners, here's how you swap out batteries on the detector. Here's how you, change the filter in the furnace. Everything that as a homeowner might have to do, we're teaching our tenants, and we're, and we get them into a routine to think about it.
And then they pick up those responsibilities when they take over the home.
Yeah.
Provide any more maintenance at that point.
Right, and so one of the other things that we do is, the way that we've structured these deals, they generate cash flow, right? And we aren't taking that cash flow. We're, for our organization, we're plugging it back into the deal, right? And so, you're thinking, this is a 15-year-old home. There's going to be a ton of stuff to do on it. Well, we've been doing that throughout the entire period. So, HVAC systems, roofs, that sort of, kind of we are addressing that, throughout the compliance period. And so when we get to the end, we actually do a health and safety inspection, and we say, okay, are there things that we need to address, and we'll address them as part of the closing.
So they're really good quality homes by the time they start out and by the time they finish. We don't neglect them at any point.
So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is like, are you so you're not selling them at market value, correct?
Correct.
So does the city ever like re-estimate the value of the home and then change the taxing accordingly based on the value of the home at a certain given point? And would that tax burden make the home unaffordable for these people? Is that a concern, and how do you address that?
Well, that's a good question. So I mean, if we are, in some of the neighborhoods on the east side, if we're selling a home at 25,000, we're probably selling it at market.
Okay.
If we're selling a home in, Ohio City, I bet you the comps are gonna be in the 150 to 200 range.
Yeah.
If you average it out, right? So, I mean, that could be an issue that would come up. Typically they would look first at kind of the sale, and then they would look at the rest of the neighborhood. But yeah, I mean, that's something that, like so I'll give you an example, Avon Lake, where I live.
Yeah.
There's all these, with mansion types of homes, there's the traditional single family like mine, right? And there are people who, own kind of like rural pieces of land, right? Like the people who own the horse farm next to us and kind of another kind of like kind of crop area all the way down. And they're running the same issue there too, right? With the kind of taxes.
Yeah.
So it's something that, when the city is addressing kind of, some of our, the increasing values, the city is going to have to become more cognizant of and address too. And really look to more the nature of the value and nature of the transaction from the homeowner, and try to figure out some of that, because those property values can become an issue for our local tenants or anyone, within the city.
So does CHN work at all with the city to advocate for that, or is that kind of more on the homeowners?
Yeah, so if a homeowner wanted to appeal their taxes, their real estate taxes, that's something that they would have to do. We're in constant communication with the city around, kind of our lease purchase program, and, kind of the issues that, can arise with it. And one of those is the transition from abatement to non-abatement.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just some great stats here. Homeowners remaining in home 5-year different title 98%. Median sale price is at just short of 20, and homes made to lease purchase buyers 525 plus. So and as the tightening happened, as I mentioned with Dodd-Frank, banks stopped lending. So if you looked at our lease purchase portfolio before 2008, you would see 90+% of our renters were bankable, right? They would get mortgages from the banks. You change 6 months, and it's the exact opposite plus, right? So we went to Ohio Housing Finance Agency, we went to county city government, we went to a couple of banks, and we said, help us to create a loan fund that will allow for us to continue the lease purchase promise, and we've utilized that. We paid everyone back that needed to be paid back, we've been able to otherwise have 525 plus buyers who otherwise wouldn't have been able to get traditional financing become homeowners. Pretty cool. Planning. So this is our lease purchase approach. 50 to 100 scattered site single homes. We're concentrating in areas, right? We want to not just do scattered site all over the city, but we want to be able to have a stabilizing, revitalizing effect. So we will work with the local CDC to figure out, hey, is there a 4 to 6 block area that we can do our development efforts in that would have a stabilizing effect. Or in some cases, now where we are with some neighborhoods, can help to promote kind of affordable housing instead of kind of a gentrification of the entire neighborhood. Shared responsibilities we talked about, preparation and transition. We counsel our residents for 5 years prior to homeownership in a really strong housing counseling model. It's called our Family Success Program. I won't go over all the details of it today, but I have a slide on it, and I'm happy to kind of chat with anyone who's interested in it. It's a very comprehensive program. It has some great results in terms of improving people's credit worthiness. And we built a platform that really people haven't been able to replicate that We can offer closing cost assistance. We were using public funds, but as those dried up, we went to private institutions in order to get it from banks and philanthropy, IDA programs, and then I already mentioned our short-term self-finance loans at 0%. Lease purchase approach, there's a whole lot of stuff here. I don't really want to get into all the detail, but really, you're thinking about, a lease purchase project and any, project we're going to eventually sell to someone. You need to think about capital structure, you need about your operations and maintenance. So capital structure, how are you structuring the deal? Is this a home ownership program or is this a leasing program? A program that would have encourage tenancy would tend to have higher debt load. If you have a lower debt load, you're creating a home ownership program. That's sort of the detail there. Operations maintenance, we've built a platform because we've done so much of this that has allowed for us to be kind of like perfect and bring our costs down in maintenance of single family homes. It's really a kind of specialized skill set. One of the things that, to address the question that you had around what does our debt look like at the end and what are we transitioning over, we actually don't use our reserves. So in affordable housing YTEC deals, we have replacement reserve requirements and we have operating reserve requirements. Replacement reserve address capital needs, operating reserve, operating cash flow issues, right? We jealously guard those. We actually invest them in like short-term, like CDs and that sort of thing, and we jealously guard them. And we utilize them at the end of the compliance period to help address capital needs, debt issues, to make sure that we have a home ownership program ready for people. One thing on here that forced tenant interaction. So most of our people that come in, they're like, hey, I want to be a homeowner, or they at least say they want to be, right? But then we get to a point where it's like, you go into thirds. A third of our people really want to be homeowners and are ready to. A third are like, hey, yeah, I want to, but I got some things going on. A third are like, oh, I don't know, I don't really want to, maybe I don't want to at all. And so we work with them, we create a plan for each of them to address it. And what we do is we continue this engagement every 6 months, starting in year 11. So we move our leases from a 1-year lease to a 6-month lease, so we can have continued interaction with them and kind of help them to kind of work on their issues, become more creditworthy, to keep them on the path to home ownership. That's where they want to go. The lending structure, I talked about the equivalency principle earlier and how that works. Pre-purchase buyer prep and post-closing buyer follow-up. We talked about a lot of this already. One of the things that we have built is a really high-touch servicing platform. And as we've talked to banks about CDFI execution, financial institution inspection or structure, they have said, hey, do you want us to do the servicing, i.e. the banks, or do you want CHN, us, to do the servicing? Because if you're making loans to low-moderate income individuals, and particularly at the lower in the income kind of scale you go, you need more high touch. You need to have safety net support, potentially support them if there's a shock to their job, if there's a medical issue that comes up that's acute, that drains their kind of their cash flow. This is the Family Success Program I talk about, really components of financial services, income supports, housing, and workforce development, which is a whole class on how to do that.
So not to overemphasize this, but CHM's lease purchase program is really one of the best in the country. Nobody's really made it work as well. Maybe we are the best, are we?
I think so.
So it's, talk about a public service, a public policy, a program that actually achieves its purpose and is replicable, hopefully. This is it. This program is the main reason I asked Kevin to come speak, because it's worked so well. We're getting huge national attention for it every time we turn around and somebody wants to talk about it, because no one else around the country's made it work this well.
Yeah, so you have low-income folks, defines really 60% of their earning income or less, who really would have no chance at home ownership in the traditional model, right? And we're able to work with them through the leasing period to help them to kind of build their own kind of financial and personal wherewithal, become homeowners, and then convert them to it. We've done it, 1,100 plus times, over the course of the program. So is we need, it's also been, you know, we have got a couple of things, Family Success Initiative, and then youth services. It's also allowed for us to have a bit of a laboratory, you know, to work with our residents. Our lease purchase residents are kind of like, it's a constant interaction with CHN, right? I mean, we really kind of have this, we have a good reputation with them. They come to us, we come to them, you know, they're trying to test out different models. So like one of the things that we've done is we created something we call Youth Services Initiative, and we've partnered with YOU. This past year, we had about 140 internships for our tenants' kids, right? So about low-income kids who, you know, for me, I told you I grew up in a blue-collar family, but I had connections, you know, through friends and family that can help me get my first job or help me do this sort of thing, right? What we're doing is creating opportunity for people to be able to go and work at Sherwin-Williams, at Key Bank, at, you know, Medical Mutual, with the police department, right? I mean, we have all these things where we can use this platform to try to kind of create other opportunities for people, and those have resulted in permanent placements as well, which is pretty sweet.
So how many units do you guys own at any one given time?
Yeah, so right now we're in the like 1,300 space, overall units. You know, we're selling off, in the lease purchase world, we're selling off more than we're producing. The Ohio Housing Finance Agency is really incentivizing less units per development in a lease purchase project than it was before. But, you know, then we go to kind of multifamily space to kind of continue.
And the construction company or the
Yeah, our general contractor.
right, your general contractor, they're the one getting the tax credits.
It is, so no, CHN Housing Partners is awarded tax credits by the allocating agency. And then we create a partnership, a limited partnership.
So it's a taxable entity.
The limited partnership is a taxable entity. It generates tax credits. The bank is a 99.99% limited partner in that entity. And an affiliate entity owned by CHN Housing Partners would be the 0.01 general partner. And the profits and losses are allocated 99.99 and 0.01, so they get the full tax benefit of, you know, kind of the tax credits and losses. Stuff like cash flows, cash flow waterfall, depending on how we structure it, could go actually 90-10, CHN's GP entity to 10% limited partner, and likewise kind of on the back end.
And then the 501c3 then is doing all the support service.
Yes. And the development. Yeah. If CHN is an owner, it can be the general contractor, it can be the property manager, and it's all tax exempt. You know, there's varying degrees of what isn't tax exempt based on the service you provide if you're working with a third party. So in most cases,
But it doesn't pay to do that because then you don't get tax credits. So.
well, we could, yeah. Well, it's a little more complicated, but you know, we could do deals where we work for a third party who's a fellow nonprofit and get tax credits and still kind of get our developer fee out of it, or still do the general contracting for it. So it still delivers our double bottom line. So like if we look at like the Westerly, right? So Westerly Apartments in Lakewood, we partnered there with did I say Westerly? Yeah, in Lakewood, off of Detroit Road. There's about 500, 600 units of senior housing there. It's all low-income housing, and so there's 3 buildings. It is a historic site because it was the first senior building in Ohio funded by HUD, something like that. Not architecturally significant per se, but you know, culturally significant, I guess. It has historic tax credits and housing tax credits. So we are the developer on that project. So we get paid for being the developer for our sister nonprofit, which is Lakewood Senior Center. So Lakewood Senior Center is the owner, and we property manage the project. So there are instances where, in that case, we would apply on behalf of Lakewood Senior Center because we have the reputation with the Ohio Housing Finance Agency.
So I'm confused though. So what is the benefit of having tax credits applied to your project if you're already a nonprofit?
It's the tax benefits don't flow to the nonprofit; they flow to the for-profit who is providing the equity. Yeah.
So that's their incentive to provide that.
Yeah, to make, yeah,
Right.
yeah. Yeah, so that's, yeah,
Otherwise, we can't
9999.
come up with the
Yeah,
equity.
TNC's probably raised.
The Key's our biggest investor, and yeah, we work with PNC, work with Huntington. So our last Slide Village Green Homes, which was 37 units, a single family lease purchase, in Slide Village neighborhood, Slide Village Green Homes. That was, Huntington was the lender, and we worked with a equity syndicator, which is kind of a middleman, I'll say. They used to be a direct investor at Key, so I like to call them middlemen. They're our competitors, but they are an intermediary, so they brought the equity through a multi-investor fund, which was a bunch of banks. Yeah.
Just a short question for interest. Why did you change the name? The name was,
So it was a kind of a refresh of who, as to who we are. It was catching up with who we are in a lot of ways, right? So we started as Cleveland Housing Network, and it was a network of CDCs, right? And it kind of the old traditional sense in the 1980s. And what we found was, those CDCs are still an important part of our governance and, philosophy, right? But, we partner with all these sister nonprofits, right? I'll give you the full details because you asked. So, we partner with all these sister nonprofits, right? We partner with government entities, we partner with energy companies, we partner with philanthropy to do certain mission-oriented work. So we thought partners was a good name for that, right? And then we look at housing, that's who we are, housing stability folks. Like if you talk to Rob Curry, as director, who's CHN? You say, the housing stability people, or usually housing stability folks. And CHN, I know other organizations that went through rebranding and created a whole new name for themselves, right? I won't mention them, okay. But, and they're like, this is terrible, it's tough because you have this brand equity thing you've built over time. So that's why we're CHN, Housing Partners.
So we kept the well-known, credible part of the old name and adjusted to the new reality.
Do you have competition in the industry, maybe for profit or other non-profit, and maybe they pose some barriers to you?
Sure.
How do you overcome them?
Yeah, there's a couple ways you kind of hug them, right, and become partners with them. And that's, in our kind of the nonprofit world, that's a lot easier, right? So, sometimes, we'll be co-developers with other nonprofits. Sometimes it's, hey, they're doing their thing, we're doing our thing. So, like an example would be kind of in Cleveland, or in Ohio, the Ohio Housing Finance Agency requires that in certain set aside of the tax credit allocation, they receive a letter from the mayor, right? So Mayor Frank Jackson has been generous to CHN in providing us, support letters, but they hasn't always provided us the support letter. Or maybe he hasn't provided all of our projects the support letter, and it'll go to other projects that are kind of, mayoral priorities, which are, which is cool, right? I mean, it's kind of the way that it works. So what we do is typically we would apply for 4 projects a year through that 9% competitive round, and on average we get awarded 2 of them. So there are some that we may go in 3 or 4 times to try to get awarded. Slide Village Green Homes is one of those. Others first time as they hit the priorities. Maybe other people aren't as competitive. Or there aren't as many people that can address the need. One of those is permanent supportive housing. That's a very specialized pool of tax credits. There aren't a lot of people that can do it well in the state. We are one of those. So, we traditionally would be awarded those as we were working through the Housing First Initiative.
For the communications class, one of the other ways you compete is through keeping your reputation positive, right? So, part of my job.
Yeah. For-profits, they also, we generally haven't, partnered with for-profits, not because we think they're bad, but just really haven't. They kind of do their own thing, right? And so, we have in some ways, like if you look at Nowak and Finch Group, right? We did the affordable component.
That's the development by the clinic.
Yeah, like Upper Chester, Upper Chester. We did the affordable component of that, and he did the market rate component of it. But yeah, it's competitive, and there are for-profits and nonprofits in this space, and everyone has their own kind of economic and mission orientations.
Any other questions, reactions, challenges? No?
Maybe the last, the video, the short video we saw, it seems the main problem is not only housing, but the security. That family was showing, the security. How do you deal with this, especially in building houses, the question of security?
Yeah, so, I mean, that's part of, as we've been thinking through, so in single family. Well, I'll talk about single family, and then I'll talk about a couple of the other type of executions, right? So in single family executions, that's part of the reason why we have gone to kind of the community-based CDC, 4-6 square block model, right? That has more of a stabilizing effect within a community. And there's more people on the street, there's more people that are living in their homes, and that will in itself oftentimes have a kind of stabilizing effect and help to drive down kind of crime within the neighborhood. We work with the police to try to, like for example, kind of out in the Buckeye neighborhood, where we had some homes, we did a service day, right? And so we had CHN, we had the police, and the police from like 4th, 3rd, 5th districts came out and, were part of a community day. And we blocked off a street, and we did a cleanup of the entire street. And so, we have partnerships with, the, kind of different government entities, to help come from a neighborhood perspective. But then when you look at like a purpose supportive housing project, this is multifamily, 60 units plus or minus, of people who have got severe addiction, mental health, issues. We actually provide 24-hour security in those buildings. I have a man desk at 24 hours to help both internally but also externally to keep elements that are always trying to influence, negatively our residents, but keep it more of a secure environment.
Well, thank you so
very
much.
Yeah, I'll leave a couple of my cards, so if, and I think I have my contact information on here. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, want to chat, grab a coffee, talk more about affordable housing, tax, law, etc. I'm happy to.
If you're like that.
Bring that. Yeah. Cool, thank you.
So, isn't this a great class? Don't you want to? Thank you so much. This is great.
Do you want to turn it on? Do you want to turn it off?
Yes. So I know how to find them too.